Welcome attendees to the first ever queer family planning event at the 519. All of the other speakers have been in person today, but the one that I really wanted you to meet is Morgan Sheridan. And Morgan is a financial advisor in the Barrie area, works virtually across everywhere. So if you need him, call him. And he was going to join us today, but if we're having a queer family planning event, we have to acknowledge that family comes first. And Morgan's two girls are in a dance recital on the morning of this event. So instead, he and I have recorded a conversation for you to listen to. So welcome, Morgan. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, about your family, and then why is seeing a financial advisor so important way before we even get talking about gametes and surrogacy and adoption and everything else?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I so badly wanted to be here in person too. And the girls have a ballet recital, which they've been feverishly working on. And so unfortunately, I have to skip to attend that, but I'll be sure to send off pictures.
Yes.
I'm a financial advisor with Edward Jones in Barrie. I've been a financial advisor with them for about 17 years now, and built my business. And I am a gay father of twin girls, Grace and Olivia. They're turning 6 in September. They are, I think, adorable little women because I think every parent has to think that. They are very strong-willed, opinionated young women, which I think is very good in this day and age. I do worry about how that's going to be when they're teenagers, but for now, it's yeah, it's a good thing. So thanks for having me. And I really enjoy and I talk passionately about this topic because it is one that I went through, that we went through ourselves when we went through our surrogacy journey. And I can speak about it from a financial point of view. I would say I'm going to break the talk down into a couple parts. I want to talk about pre-baby, and I want to talk about post-baby, because really there are some differences to them. When we're talking about pre-baby, that's when I would say that really gives you a chance to look at things and get your financial house in order. And depending on where you are in the journey, you might have already realized how expensive it is for LGBTQ plus people to have children. It can be really expensive. So you might already be on that journey. But if you're right at the very beginning of this journey looking out, what I would say is you really need to know where you're at. And you need to do this as a couple. You need to see where you're at. You need to look to see how much the expenses are going to be for the surrogacy journey. And if you're already well on your way through the surrogacy journey, if you have a date when your baby is going to be born, then it's even more important to look beyond that. So what I say is one evening, have a sit down and really look at where you're at. Look at what those expenses are going to be. And this doesn't have to be a really in-depth endeavor. It doesn't have to be complicated. And I hate saying the word budget because people have a visceral reaction when I say the word budget because it's like going to the dentist, right? And it's like getting a filling, and it doesn't necessarily have to be. Budgeting means things to different people, but look at your expenses. And my advice is sit down as a couple. And if you've got and print them, if you can print them, print your bank statements and print your visa statements and print 2 months of each and get two different colored highlighters. And I tell people have one for your fixed expenses, your necessary expenses, and have one for discretionary and start highlighting. Those necessary expenses when you're going through are things that you have to pay. So that's going to be mortgages, that's going to be your rent, that's utilities, that's car, that's food, that's all the stuff that you need to survive. Highlight what all of those are. Then take a look at what your discretionary expenses are. And those are often known as the fun ones. And those are the most unfortunate ones, but those can add up. Have a separate color highlighter for those. That's the fun money. That's eating out. That's vacations. That's expensive clothes. Those are gifts. And that's all of that stuff. And take a look and tally everything up. And at the end of it all, have an honest conversation and see how surprised you were. Maybe you were surprised to the good side. Maybe you weren't. But what I tell people is if you've got more money going out than coming in, you're not at a process to start this journey. You have really got to get your financial house in order. And what I tell people is when you look at that, and if your discretionary expenses are high, then you'll have to trim back a little bit. And it's good to get used to doing it pre-baby. So the easiest thing would be eating out, right? Looking at cutting back on what some of those expenses are and really starting to get your financial house in order. That's the first step I would do. The second thing I would say is if your financial resources are a little bit tight and perhaps you're still a good budgeter, but you don't have a robust nest egg, still have children, do it. Figure out a way. I tell people it is an incredible journey, but you might need some help with some credit. And what I tell people is look to the bank and look at your assets and see what it is that you can leverage to help you along. So we often say in our industry that you should have 3 to 6 months worth of savings aside. That is really difficult to do, especially in this high inflationary environment. Really difficult to do. And most people don't have that. So what I tell people is look to see what you can get for lines of credit before going on parental leave and before having that baby. And as a bit of a refresher, I would say there's two different types of lines of credit that you can get. One is a regular line of credit, and you would get that from the bank. A regular line of credit means that you've got to go in and you've got to be approved for it. So they're going to take a look at what your income is, what your expenses are, and all of that. The reason why it's important to do this before you have a baby is because one of you, or maybe both of you, are going to be taking parental leave. And that's going to mean that your income is going to be reduced. When your income is reduced, it becomes a lot more difficult to qualify. And I will say that since interest rates have gone up, it has become increasingly difficult to access lines of credit. The banks have become a little bit tighter on them. So do this before. If you have a baby and you're on parental leave and your expenses are really tight and you just need some money to float you, and then you go applying for a line of credit, it's often not a great result. So I would say line of credit is one that you would go to the bank, and it's similar to just any loan. You would go, you would apply, and you'd be approved. There's something that's also known as a HELOC, which is better. Now, in order to get a HELOC, that's a home equity line of credit, you have to own a home. So if you don't own a home, you'll go with a line of credit. If you own a home, go for a HELOC. And the reason why a HELOC is preferred is because it's a lower interest rate. So again, there's some rigor to applying for this, but the benefit of a line of credit versus increasing your Visa or your MasterCard is that with a line of credit, you don't pay any interest unless you borrow the money. But I advise people to do that. And before even going into a surrogacy journey or going into a parental journey, get a line of credit from the bank. If you don't have one, or if it's only $5,000, get an increase. Everybody should have one because you never know what those one-time expenses are, and it can just alleviate a lot of stress. So do that before. The other thing I would do pre-baby is take a look at your life insurance. So if you've got a little baby that's coming along, you now have to be a very responsible adult. And even though I'm now in my 40s, I still don't feel that I'm a responsible adult, but somehow I have to be. And you've got to look at things. And so you're going to have a dependent. And your job as a parent is to provide for that dependent. And if you don't have life insurance, that is something that you need to look at before having a baby. And I really, really stress that. And you might have life insurance at work. It might be 1 or 2 times salary, but it is worth looking at getting private life insurance. And that's because, God forbid, if something were to happen to you or both parents and what's known as a common disaster and you both pass away, you have to have money set aside to look after your dependent, your baby, right? So get that insurance before you have the baby. And if you are a parent who is carrying a baby, sometimes there are some postpartum medical issues which can prohibit you from qualifying for life insurance. So do that before you have a baby. There's underwriting requirements, which means a nurse is going to have to come to your house. They're going to take blood. They're going to take your weight, and you just do all of that before you have a little baby. So look at your life insurance and look at that. Generally speaking, if you have a little baby, I mean, there's a lot of complex analysis that you can do, but if you have a little baby, I would say 5 times salary is probably within the realm of what you're looking for, just to look after that baby if something were to happen to you. The last thing that I would do, in addition to all of those many steps above, is, and this is by far the most important thing, is look at your will and get a will done. And my sense is that for many of you who are in the process of having a baby, you're still relatively young, probably 50 and under. Death seems very far away, and it's not a topic that most people don't like to talk about. However, again, being that responsible adult and having a baby that's coming along, that is something that is critical to do. And if something were to happen to you, either you alone or if there's two parents, intended parents who are together, and if both of you pass away in a common disaster and you die without a will, that's called dying intestate, so without a will. And if you don't have a will, the courts decide who your child goes to, who manages your assets, and who the trustee is. They decide, not you. And you might not want crazy Uncle Lloyd. I have an Uncle Lloyd, who's not crazy, although he probably is. But um, maybe you don't want him to look after your child, right? Maybe you don't want him to be the trustee of your account, and they're going to look to next of kin, and it can get messy. And so it is very unlikely that you will pass away, but it does happen. And that is really important, right? Is making sure that you have a will, or even just making sure that if your spouse is that you have a will and that your spouse gets everything that you need, that trusts are set up. I've seen some awful, awful things happen. So make sure that you do those things. So that's pre-baby. That's a lot of work, but if you go through all of those steps and you look at things, you will be in a much stronger financial position when the baby's born. Does that all make sense? Okay. I'll talk a little bit about what happens when you finally do have a baby, because that can be a little bit of a whirlwind. And again, there's a lot that's on there's a lot that's on the go. I still think, when we had the twins, I actually don't think I remember those first 8 months. Somehow they're blanked out of my mind because they were so difficult, rewarding, but to be honest, it's going to be tiring. And I remember washing bottles at 3 o'clock in the morning, and in 3 hours having to get up and go for work. So one of the things you don't want to be doing is reviewing a draft will when you have a baby. So good thing to get that done. My number one advice, financial piece of advice, when the baby finally does come, is don't panic. Don't panic financially. And I'll tell you why. You are going to have money flying out the door, and that's normal. Your expenses are going to increase dramatically. Don't stress. That is the way that it goes. And we'll talk about some different things that you can do to mitigate that. But babies are expensive. And if you've been a diligent saver and your bank account has always been on the plus side and you're seeing that it's going negative every month, don't stress. Every single person is in that same situation. And you are entering into a wonderful time of your life, but you're entering into a period where your incomes are down because you have a baby at home. You're not working overtime. You've probably got one or two parents on parental leave. So your incomes are going to be down, and your expenses are really high. So those two things are can be very difficult for people, but don't stress. First thing I would do is when your baby is born, apply for the Canada Child Benefit, the CCB. That is something that you have to apply for. Your baby has to be born. You can't apply pre, your baby has to be born. But if your income, it's an income tested benefit provided by the government of Canada, and it is a tax free benefit, which is huge. For children under the age of 6, if your income is below $35,000, your household income, your net adjusted household income, that can be up to $7,400 a year per child under the age of 6. The more children you have, the more money you get. As your income rises, that amount gets reduced, but it is still something to apply for. The reasoning being is, again, your incomes are lower, right? So the chances of you getting more money at this stage is higher. Apply for that benefit, and you can do it on the CRA website as soon as the baby is born so that you can start to collect that benefit. The other thing that I would do, and I stress this too, is start saving for your children's education. And again, it's a bit of an oxymoron because I just said you're going to be financially squeezed, but you need to figure out how to save for an art within for your children's education. And the reason why I say that is because the earlier that you start, the bigger bang for your buck that you get. And what I mean is if you start saving when your baby is, 6 months old for their education when they turn 18, versus if you start saving when they're 15 years old, the compounding and earnings growth on that is tremendous. It is a tremendous difference. And there is a vehicle which you've probably all heard of known as an RESP. And I really, really encourage everybody to open those when the baby is born. You need a SIN number, a social insurance number, in order to open one up. And you can, again, apply for your baby. That'll take a little bit of time, but you do need a social insurance number in order to do that. And with an RESP per child, you contribute $2,500 a year, and the government will give you a 20% bonus of $500 a year on that automatically. So you then get essentially you're earning 20% every single year on that money that goes in. You invest the money, it grows tax free, and it compounds every year. And that is significant. And over the years, it can really, really make a significant impact on that dent. When I first had the girls, when we first had the girls, I ran their I ran we have an RESP calculator on what the cost of their education would be when they're 18 years old. And I had to pick a university. And I said, let's say they go to Guelph. Let's say they go to the University of Guelph. They both stay in residence and they're both doing, I don't know, a 4-year program. And this was about 6 years ago. The cost for the two of them was about $292,000 in education. Yeah, that's at full pop. I know. So hopefully they're really smart and they'll have a scholarship. But we diligently started saving. And even though they're only turning 6, we have 45% of their education saved because we've been very, very diligent in saving that money, getting those government grants. And that's why the earlier that you can start, the bigger the difference that makes. I do want to say too, and this is just a personal preference. My preference is if you can stay with what's known as a traditional RESP, there are all different kinds that are out there. There's scholarship plans, there's various other things. I'm not a big fan of those. And you can reach out to me if you want to find out more why. But a traditional RESP would be those that are provided by your bank, by your financial institution, by a financial advisor, and not an outside company. And the reason why is a traditional RESP is cheaper, saves you money on costs, it's simpler. And now, one of the big differences to that versus a scholarship plan is if your child ends up being like Taylor Swift, and let's say doesn't go to university and becomes a really, really big pop star, what you can do is now, if they choose not to go to school, you can roll the RESP into your RRSP at the end. So the money is not gone. In a lot of other plans, the money is gone if they choose not to go to school. So if you need more information on RESPs, you can let me know. And again, what I would also say is that RESPs are hard to set up because you're already cash flow squeezed. And, a couple $100 might sound like a lot, but gifts from grandparents love giving money towards education. They do. And it's a great Christmas gift, right? From grandparents. And I often find that if you set up an RESP and you tell the grandparents that you've set this up and that you're trying to save for their education and that it's $200 a month, miracles happen, right? But get that done. Get that done. The other thing I would advise too is really start looking at daycare really early on because those lists and the lists can be pretty tremendous when you the long waiting lists can be pretty tremendous. We now, as many of you might be aware, have a national child daycare plan, that $10 a day daycare plan. And that is wonderful for budgeting because they didn't have that quite rolled out when the girls were in daycare and we were spending thousands of dollars a month in daycare costs. But the National Child Daycare Plan, $10 a day is great, but it has increased wait times significantly in those facilities who have opted in. So as soon as your baby is born, and again, looking out to say, I'm on a 12-month parental leave or I'm on an 18-month parental leave, get on that wait list as soon as you can because the savings can be tremendous, but the wait lists are long. So for children who are under the age of 6, with an institution that has subscribed to the National Daycare Plan, that can be a tremendous savings, and $10 a day. So I would look at that. The biggest thing, and I know that I've said this before, is absolutely don't stress about your finances. And many of us, and I'm included in that too, are in what's known as that sandwich generation, right? Where I have elderly parents. I have Uncle Lloyd, who unfortunately has Alzheimer's and who's in a senior's home, who I have to take time off and take to a specialist appointment and still pick my kids up from school. Um, it's difficult and it is financially stressful, but so worth it. So worth it. And if you don't get the RESP started, and if you just if it is more of a financial struggle than what you think, everybody feels that way. And just remember, you have makeup time. So the most expensive period of your life is when your kids are 12 and under, assuming that you've got education paid for. Um, After that period of time, things start to get a little bit easier. And if you haven't quite saved for your retirement yet, or you're not quite where you are, you can supercharge your savings when you're in your 50s, when you're in your late 50s. There's amazing things that you can do, but don't stress about it. That's my advice. That's my advice. I know that was a lot of detail and that was a lot of stuff in that short period of time. And I wish that I was here to answer questions. But if anybody has any, you can certainly just let me know.
Absolutely. And I will have your contact information available for all of the attendees today so that they know how to get in touch with you to ask you their specific questions, because each family, each individual has their own unique set of circumstances that they bring to the table that they're going to want to ask you questions about.
For sure. Yeah, happy to. Happy to. Anything that anyone needs. I know being a parent who's been through that, I'm happy to do it.
Excellent. And if I can just add on to one little thing that you said, I would, as soon as you know you're going to have a baby, whether you're birthing with a surrogate and you know the due date for the baby's arrival, or you're adopting, or you're conceiving using IUI or IVF, whatever, and you, as soon as you know that child's arrival date, get your name on that wait list. The baby doesn't have to be here to go on a wait list for childcare. So if I can
That's a
just
very good
add
point.
to that.
It's a very good point. And now I would say that even there are some daycares that are now even opting out of for there's various different reasons. But if you can try to get on one that supports the national daycare plan, it's great. But you're right, the wait lists are really long. Some of them are 18 months,
Oh, it's
I've
insane.
heard.
It's it's
Yeah,
it's really
yeah,
difficult, and it feels prohibitive. So, if you can get
yeah.
your name on that list, then do it for sure, for sure.
I touched on it too, and I just when you think about what your support network is, we talk about support networks, and when we think about support networks, we think of those as being maybe our parents or extended family, and we think about that as physical support. Sometimes we think about that as being giving you a chance to have a nap and having a shower, looking after your baby, but also look at that extended network as financial support as well.
Mhm.
And parents can be tremendous financial resources, but sometimes they don't know where to start. I have parents who come into me and say, look, my family never talked about money. We don't know, we want to help, but we don't know what to do.
Right.
And I know that that's difficult sometimes, but if it comes down to money and things are a little bit tight, talk to your parents, talk
Mhm.
to that extended family, because when we think about who our support network is, it's those same people, but it can be financial support too. I had a client who um, didn't have tremendous means, and her parents didn't have tremendous means either. And she had gone through many different rounds of in vitro, and their costs were mounting. And she had an aunt who never had children. And she started to, just on a conversation, talk about what those costs were. Her aunt thankfully ended up being, she was a very good saver. She was a very financially savvy woman. She funded the rest of
Wow.
their in vitro and set up RESPs. She was a tremendous help and she came out of nowhere. And the reason is because they didn't ask,
Mhm.
right? And if it wasn't for that conversation, she wouldn't have thought these people need help. So think of that too, right? And people love kids and they want to help you. And so never be afraid to ask for help, physical help, but financial help too,
Sure.
because you'd often be surprised that you'll get it.
Yeah. Yeah, you can always ask. You don't have to expect, but you can certainly always ask. And I think that's a really, really wise thing to say. Thank you.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, my girls ask me for money all the time and I say no, but they still get it. I can only imagine when they're older.
The Bank of
Yeah.
Dad.
Yeah, I know. My goodness. And then, and don't start this. This is not a parenting thing, but we had to, because they kept coming into our room and sleeping, and I'm a light sleeper. It was very disruptive. So we give them a toonie for each night that they stay in their own bed.
Right.
And that has built up. That has built up. I'm not a parenting expert, but and then it teaches them about budgeting and various other things, and
Sure.
that's been great. And you know what? That is the best $4 each night that I could spend. Yeah.
Well, and we typically give our kids allowances for doing nothing. At least this is letting you get some sleep. And in the long run, that helps them because daddy's less grumpy when daddy gets to sleep.
Yes, very much
Just
so.
saying.
Very much so. And it's good too because I actually just saw on the news today that in Ontario they announced a financial literacy requirement for those who are graduating high school. I think it's going to be a few years away, but we don't do that well. We
No.
do not do that well in this country. And financial literacy, I mean, you might, and it is valuable, but I remember after graduating, I knew all kinds of things in high school about geology. I had a very passionate geography teacher, and I knew a lot about rocks, but I didn't really know much about money,
No.
and both are important. Both are important. But I think the earlier that you can teach your kids about money, the better for sure. And there's been numerous studies that have shown that parents that are open and talking to their kids about money, they are more financially successful young adults and later adults as well. And I believe that. And I know that some families don't like to talk about money, but if that is something that you want to break, you can break it with your own kids, and you can talk about money. We do. I mean, even though the girls are only turning 6, we talk about money with them, and we talk about how you make it, and how important it is to save it, and how much you have, and how much things cost, and it just brings that awareness, right? Really important to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. And as I say, I promise everyone who's here will have a chance to find out how to get in touch with Morgan. And
Thank you.
when I get this editing done, I'll put it at the bottom of the screen.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. I appreciate it.